This episode of Infinite Scroll is brought to you by BRITA. From water talk to the emotional support water bottle, Gen Z and millennials have developed an obsession with water and staying hydrated. So if you're ready to take your hydration game to the next level, BRITA is the way to go. With Brita's water filter jugs, you can enjoy pure and fresh-tasting filtered water straight from any tap. By ditching single-use plastic bottles, you'll be doing your bit for the planet and drinking water that tastes amazing. Brita doesn't just filter water, it filters out the guilt of plastic waste. Thank you to Brita for supporting the pod, helping us keep our deep dives going, and of course, keeping us hydrated. You don't owe anyone anything. This phrase echoes across social media. It's the idea that we are not required to live up to what others expect of us or sacrifice our needs, desires, or well-being for another person's benefit. From self-help creators to bro podcasters to TikTokers, it seems like young people are peddling this mentality and going viral for it. Even traditional media has picked up on it. The Guardian ran a piece earlier this year on how this mentality is driving a rise in flaking out on social plans. This virality and coverage not only spreads this idea, but also serves as validation, lending legitimacy to this mentality for better or worse. Gen Z has faced plenty of criticism over the years, from the infamous Gen Z stare to claims that they are unreliable at work. But one thread runs through all of it, and you can see it in the you don't owe anyone anything mentality. Hyper-individualism. Think pieces, video essays, and TikTok commentary videos throw around this term a lot, claiming that this demographic has a lone wolf mentality. In this episode, we are interrogating that stereotype. We'll explore what hyper-individualism really means, the societal and political forces behind it, and ask the big question, is Gen Z truly a hyper-individualistic generation? From Centennial World, I'm Lauren Meisner, and this is Infinite Scroll, a podcast about internet culture, the creator economy, and how social media is shaping Gen Z. Welcome back to Infinite Scroll, everyone. All right, we haven't done a true video essay in a hot minute, and that is what you guys are getting today. This episode is very much an exploration into both sides of the argument on if Gen Z as a generation is actually more hyper-individualistic than previous generations, or if that is just an unfair label. We do draw some conclusions at the end, of course, but before we get into it, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. Please Spotify star rate us. We are still trying to get to 1,000 Spotify star ratings. I know I started pushing you guys to subscribe to YouTube in the middle of our crusade to get 1,000 Spotify star ratings, so I kind of dropped off asking you guys to rate us, but please rate us on Spotify. It helps us so much. Please buy us a coffee if you feel so inclined. Every single dollar goes back into the business, and subscribe to our newsletter called Keep Scrolling For. Hyper-individualism is a relatively modern concept. In fact, at the time of recording, a definition is not even available on two online dictionaries that we checked, the Merriam-Webster Dictionary and the Oxford English Dictionary. However, drawing on existing psychological and sociological scholarship, we can arrive at a fairly comprehensive definition. Christian Heim and Caroline Heim, in their book Resilient Relationships, note how this phenomenon, quote, lifts narcissism and instant self-gratification to a sociological ideal. Coming to the definition that, quote, hyper-individualism is extreme individualism, valuing self-expression, judgment, and a choice to shape a self-made life story, reaching for self-actualization. So in broad terms, hyper-individualism can be understood as a bias towards oneself, prioritizing one's achievements, needs, and success with less regard to society or those around you. Many pundits and experts argue that our society is moving in an increasingly hyper-individualistic direction. Instead of getting news from our social circles, we are consuming this kind of content individually, often from strangers online. Furthermore, in places like the United States and where I'm from, Canada, young people are quick to move away from their homes after high school. Autonomy has pretty much become the absolute be-all and end-all. And no, these are not necessarily negative developments, but when things go too far in any one direction, the line between positive and negative becomes blurred. There are several factors that may explain the rise in individualism and hyper-individualism in our society. among Gen Z and online? The obvious answer is neoliberalism. For those unfamiliar, this political ideology has a strong emphasis on individual responsibility. It encourages us to see ourselves as isolated individuals. It goes hand in hand with capitalism, upholding the likes of free market-led growth, deregulation, and privatization. It essentially links economic freedom to individual freedom. And for the last 50 years or so, the Western world has pretty much run on neoliberal ideals, particularly since the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. We should note here, though, that many experts and scholars have characterized Trump's ascendancy to power as the end of neoliberalism as we know it. But it may be too early to make that claim for sure. Either way, it's safe to say that neoliberalism has played a role in generating our individualistic culture up until this point. So neoliberalism is one clear driver of individualism. But another, perhaps less obvious factor, is democracy itself. The relationship between democracy and individualism has been extensively discussed within political science. And of course, there are many differing opinions. Some scholars argue that democracy encourages individualism, while others suggest the opposite. Nonetheless, a strong connection between the two concepts is widely recognized. Today, democracies dominate the world order, comprising a plurality of the domestic political systems globally. According to the Economist Intelligence Democracy Index 2024, quote, 45% of the world's population lives in a democracy, and 15% in hybrid regimes that combine electoral democracy with authoritarian tendencies. With democratic systems emphasizing individual rights and personal freedoms, it makes sense that individualism would follow. And this would be a trend we would see worldwide. Taken together, it is clear that neoliberalism and democracy created fertile ground for an individualistic society. But there are also cultural factors at play here, which we will explore a little bit later. As for how hyper-individualism may affect us personally, existing research suggests that it can lead to feelings of social isolation and extreme consumerism, a symptom of a society where individuals are atomized into personal bubbles. Such research has also found that hyper-individualism devalues the social contract, collective responsibility, and interest in shared issues. Of course, there are also positives to this kind of culture. Entrepreneurship is championed. Young people are urged to follow their own path, and self-reliance, especially when it comes to finances, is encouraged. So with all that in mind, the next question is whether Gen Z is actually hyper-individualistic, or at the very least, more so than their predecessors. Let's first explore the case for why that may be true. From our research, two trends online suggest that Gen Z is indeed hyper-individualistic. The first is how this demographic relies on therapy speak, and the second is how friendship is presented and performed online. Before we get into it though, it's worth noting that we are making somewhat broad statements here. Not every member of Gen Z will fit neatly into these patterns. Our observations are simply based on viral discourse and the kinds of trending content online. So keep that in mind. Anyway, let's start with the former. How Gen Z uses therapy speak and approaches boundaries. It is clear that Gen Z has a pretty favorable stance on boundaries, and they are definitely not pushovers. Scrolling through TikTok, you'll find hundreds of face-to-camera videos created by young people teaching viewers about boundaries. Some of these videos may offer genuine advice on how to set boundaries with people in your life. Meanwhile, others are more comedic. I'm sure many of you have come across the POV "you protected your peace a little too hard" trend at one point or another. Here, users share how by putting themselves first and setting boundaries, they have no drama going on or tea to share. It goes without saying that setting boundaries is extremely important, both for building confidence and being comfortable in social settings. Encouraging people to cut off or distance themselves from toxic dynamics, relationships, or expectations will always be good advice. This is especially true for young people, who may feel compelled to comply with peer pressure or follow trends that leave them feeling uncomfortable. But one specific phrase has caused a lot of commotion online. You don't owe anyone anything. This phrase can be helpful to some, especially chronic people pleasers. It can help these people stick to their boundaries without feeling guilty for doing so. But some observers worry that Gen Z has taken it too far. Platitudes like this can never be treated as the whole truth. Sure, we shouldn't have to feel as if we have to compromise our comfort or boundaries. But it shouldn't be a stretch to believe that we owe people basic respect, manners, and empathy. One TikToker who goes by @morg.org described phrases like, "you don't owe anyone anything," as means of justifying bad or selfish behavior.
One example of this is the phrase, "you don't owe anyone anything." Originally, this phrase was meant for people pleasers. But now you guys are using this phrase to justify being selfish and self-centered. Because what do you mean you won't give your seat up to a pregnant lady because you don't owe her anything? That's just so mean.
Now, this conversation is not new on TikTok. In 2023, a commentary creator named Michelle shared a video essentially questioning the "you don't owe anyone anything" mentality. In it, she pointed to the importance of politeness as a social contract.
I think something you need to realize that even if you think it's bullshit or you don't like it, there is like an invisible social contract that governs the way we behave with each other in the world, and it's there for a reason. Sometimes we have to do things out of politeness. It's kind of like I see people talking about like, why should I participate in a conversation that doesn't interest me? And it's like, you don't have to participate in that conversation, but you also cannot expect people to not get upset with you when you like break the social contract of niceness and politeness and don't participate. There are consequences to that.
There was quite a mixed response to Michelle's video. Most viewers saw Michelle's message as a simple reminder that we owe everyone a sense of decency and kindness at face value. But others were not convinced. Some simply disagreed with the sentiment. And perhaps on the most extreme end, some people took it to mean that Michelle was advocating for compassion towards individuals who are racist and sexist. She later took to the platform to clarify her intentions and messaging, noting that she was not trying to excuse harmful behavior or be discriminatory. While we must consume online commentary with a critical eye, the backlash Michelle received was arguably misplaced. Her decision to champion a basic level of kindness is clearly at odds with the "we don't owe anyone anything" mentality. The response, in turn, highlighted how this hyper-individualistic slogan can sometimes come at the expense of empathy and the social contract that binds many of us together. That being said, Gen Z's emphasis on personal interest and desires over basic social norms definitely highlights a hyper-individualistic streak across the generation. Similarly, the way Gen Z displays friendship online also highlights aspects of hyper-individualism. Viral content increasingly shows young people prioritizing their own convenience or desires over the collective, even when it might breach traditional social etiquette and expectations of friendship. One example involves a baby shower that went viral earlier this year. It started when a creator named BRITA Jones turned to TikTok seeking support. She had received a slew of texts from her friends telling her they would not be able to make it to her baby shower. This was 1 hour before the baby shower was scheduled to take place. In a follow-up video, Bria revealed that the only people who canceled on her baby shower were young people, specifically Gen Z and millennials. What started as a simple TikTok kicked off a massive conversation about how Gen Z prioritizes self over friendship and social expectation. One creator, Sasha, stitched Bria's original video. In it, she described this kind of behavior as a generational problem, one that leaves young people with no sense of community and a misunderstanding of social contracts.
Individualism has been pushed so much amongst millennials and especially amongst Gen Z that people are unable to decenter themselves for just 2 seconds and think about how their presence or their lack of presence would impact somebody that they maintain to love and to care about. And this is why social contracts have been completely eroded and why people struggle to find community.
The comment section shared Sasha's sentiment. One user pointed to how, quote, low-maintenance friendships had been taken too far, while another viewer made the claim that individualism is killing the youth. But it's not just isolated incidents like this one. We see similar individualistic messaging circulating across other parts of the internet. Another example, which we recently covered in a mini scroll episode, comes within the tradwife and stay-at-home girlfriend circles. Content in this niche is telling young women, whether they identify as tradwives, stay-at-home girlfriends, or leaning into the crunchy lifestyle, that they don't need female friendships as they enter phases like motherhood and marriage. Here, they argue that it is healthy to let female friendships go, so long as you are building a family. While framed as a lifestyle choice, this messaging completely undermines the importance of community and friendship. In reality, female friendships are essential sources of support, belonging, and resilience, especially during transitional life stages. So for some Gen Zs online, hyper-individualism has arguably deprioritized friendship. For others, it has made friendship more performative. From joining run clubs together to making PowerPoints for one another to share on TikTok, Gen Z often broadcasts their friendships in ways that double as content. Of course, this isn't inherently negative. This can definitely be a source of fun and community. But it illustrates how relationships can be leveraged for social or algorithmic visibility. Here, friendship can become something to display, brand, or aestheticize. This is something that Matt Lawrence speaks to in a TikTok video. Essentially, he claims that Gen Z has become obsessed with differentiating themselves through personal branding. He notes how social media users seek algorithmic approval by niching down and posting a specific type of content.
Social media has democratized virality to the point that anyone can become viral, especially if they create a specific niche. So while it might be easy to try to tell these kids just turn off the TikTok, there is a monetary and social capital drive to be performing and filming at every single moment.
In the TikTok, Matt brings up a very interesting point about the relationship between surveillance and personal branding. With this in mind, it is worth dissecting the connection between surveillance and hyper-individualism a little bit more. Gen Z have almost exclusively existed in a world where they are constantly surveilled. At any given moment, it feels like whatever they are doing can be captured and posted to social media, including by their parents. This feeling of being watched fuels the desire to perform, whether that be at work, in a restaurant, or even among friends. As surveillance, culturally, politically, and socially, seeps into nearly every aspect of life, Matt's commentary is a great example of how social media can reinforce aspects of hyper-individualism. While we may feel like we are furthering friendships by posting them online, it is easy to fall into the trap of performing for our followers and the algorithm. It's easy to start acting in our own self-interest to grow a following or pursue financial success. That said, whether through therapy speak, boundary setting, or online friendships, Gen Z does demonstrate some patterns of hyper-individualism. Personal branding, prioritizing autonomy, and self-interest appear to shape online interactions, making hyper-individualism visible across these viral contexts. Now, we need to discuss the flip side, the claim that hyper-individualism is not unique to Gen Z and that its messaging and values have resonated with previous generations as well. To start, it's worth considering the stage of life that Gen Z is currently in. Born between 1997 and 2012, Gen Z ranges from about 13 to 28 years old. They are, for the most part, teenagers and young adults. This life stage is inherently individualistic. It is a time when you are expected to put yourself first, experimenting, learning, and figuring out who you want to be. You're encouraged to explore, make mistakes, and focus on your own development. With that in mind, the assertion that Gen Z is hyper-individualistic could very well be a symptom of their life stage. It may actually be less about generational values and more about the way youth can be egocentric. This is further supported by the fact that millennials faced many of the same accusations when they were the youth generation. One journal article we came across in our research, published in 2010, examined some of the defining traits of millennials, and hyper-individualism was at the forefront. Titled Liberated Anime in Generation Next, Hyper-Individualism, Extreme Consumerism, and Social Isolationism, the article explores the forces behind millennials' alleged individualism. Interestingly, the authors point first to family dynamics. Millennials were among the first generations raised in an era where children were explicitly seen as having rights and protections. According to the authors, this emphasis on safeguarding children encouraged them to prioritize independence, autonomy, and individuality. As the journal article explains, quote, "Millennials have retained strong ties to the home. 40% still live in the family home, and 73% have received financial help from their parents in the last 12 months. This generation is accustomed to being the center of both their and their family's worlds. Having grown up in a protected and child-centered era, they view themselves as special, vital as a group to the nation, and to their parents' sense of purpose." The scholars also make the claim that hyper-individualism can be tied to digital identity formation. While Gen Z is often classified as the first generation of digital natives, millennials did spend a large portion of their teenage years online. Growing up performing for a digital audience, though on a smaller scale than Gen Z, contributed to what the authors liken to an individuality complex. They go on to suggest that this was intensified for millennials by the reality TV boom. The early 1990s marked a turning point, with MTV's The Real World laying the foundation for reality television as we know it. The show saw 7 or 8 young adults placed in a new city, living together under constant surveillance. It should be noted, though, that this show wasn't the first reality-style show to capture public attention. PBS's An American Family in the 1970s is often credited with inspiring some of the docu-soaps of today, and shows like Cops had already some level of cultural capital. Nevertheless, through the 90s and 2000s, shows like Big Brother, Jersey Shore, and The Simple Life would go on to dominate culture, shaping millennial interests and values in the process. These shows frequently rewarded polarizing personalities, self-promotion, and drama, ultimately sending a message that individuality and standing out were important. Quote, "Growing up with reality shows, this generation has seen people become famous because of who they are rather than what they do. Television shows, such as The Real World, glorify hyper-individualism. Even shows that focus nominally on skill, such as American Idol, The Apprentice, and Survivor, revel in personality and rags to riches storylines." The authors continue. Ultimately, with millennials being described as hyper-individualistic all the way back in 2010, it becomes clear that hyper-individualism is not unique to Gen Z. Perhaps a more interesting question here is whether this hyper-individualism is intensifying. And to that, you could argue yes. The reasons discussed in the journal article as to why millennials were hyper-individualistic can easily be applied to Gen Z. Much like millennials, Gen Z has grown up in an environment where children are recognized as having rights and protections. On top of this, they too have had to assert their independence and individuality in a world where traditional milestones, like buying a house, getting a secure full-time job, or being in a long-term relationship, are out of reach due to factors like the cost of living crisis, long-lasting impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, and a seemingly impending recession. By replacing traditional milestones with online identity formation, Gen Z has lived their entire lives performing for social media, archiving their development similar to how millennials did and still do. Furthermore, Gen Z has also been exposed to hyper-individualistic behavior through pop culture and reality TV. They have found their own obsessions with shows like Love Island. Season 7 of Love Island USA, for example, was even described as the most Gen Z season yet. The difference is that for Gen Z, reality TV isn't the only arena where this is taking place. Where millennial reality TV personalities were rewarded for standing out and pursuing fame and riches, Gen Z's favorite online creators are celebrated for the same thing, further entrenching a hyper-individualistic identity. Ultimately, perhaps the point we can take from both millennials and Gen Z being characterized this way is that hyper-individualism is less about generational values and more about the conditions of growing up online, in a world where visibility and individuality are currency and the keys to success. Lastly, there is another factor that is frequently left out of the Gen Z is hyper-individualistic discussion. This is the fact that individualism, and especially hyper-individualism, is very American. Don't get me wrong, this isn't something that originated in the United States. Not to get too historical here, but ideas of individualism materialized in places like England following the decline of feudalism. And the word itself seemingly emerged in France in reaction to the French Revolution. It was later consolidated by various Enlightenment thinkers and philosophers. Having said that, individualism has become an integral part of US society, culture, and politics. Take the concept of the American dream, for example. For many, the idea is that America is a place where anyone can make it. Here, people can enjoy individual freedom of choice, boundless opportunities, and personal fulfillment. Of course, this does not always acknowledge many of the systemic issues that make it infinitely harder for marginalized groups to also achieve this level of freedom. But despite this, the American dream has played a central role in the way individualism informs US society and values. Given the cultural hegemony that the United States enjoys over pop culture through Hollywood, reality TV, social media platforms, and internet culture, people are quick to assume that this individualistic outlook applies universally. But this framing overlooks other cultural contexts, like across Latin America and East Asia, that uphold more collectivist values and social norms. In this sense, the claim that Gen Z is hyper-individualistic might reflect a US-specific lens more than a universal reality. All in all, there is clearly a lot to unpack in the Gen Z is hyper-individualistic discourse, and many points are often missed in this conversation. We have done our best to explore some of them, while also acknowledging the risk of making sweeping generalizations. From our research and exploring it through this episode, we can draw a couple of conclusions. First, Gen Z does exhibit some patterns of hyper-individualism, but that doesn't mean that they are the only generation to do so. It is arguably inaccurate to position Gen Z as uniquely hyper-individualistic, especially when millennials displayed similar behaviors when they were teenagers or in their early 20s. What we are seeing may be less about inherent generational values and more about growing up online, where the digital world amplifies the drive for individuality. Though it is also worth noting that digital spaces simultaneously foster new forms of collectivism, ranging from fandoms to niche online communities. Nevertheless, the internet that Gen Z grew up with is changing, and changing quickly. With the AI age still in its infancy, it is unclear how this technology will alter our preoccupation with individualism and autonomy. But one thing is for sure, it will be disruptive. And if history is any indication, Gen Alpha will likely be the next group to be slapped with the hyper-individualistic label, whether it's accurate or not. Infinite Scroll is a podcast produced, presented, and co-written by me, Lauren Meisner, for Centennial World. This episode was researched and written by Annabelle Ben-David. Thank you so much for listening. I love you guys, and I will talk to you next week. Bye.